Welcome back to the show. Listen, today we're going to talk about how to go from zero to a million in 60 days. And how we're going to do this is we're going to talk to a friend of mine by the name of Edmund Chien. He is a coach. He is a former private equity executive. He is an all-around beast. Let's go ahead and get into it. Ed, what's up, brother?
Hey, it's great being here.
Brother, it is good to have you. I'm super excited to have you here. I don't think I missed too much on your intro, right? I have done private equity investing. As a matter of fact, you did it for 15 years, right? Around 15 years, more than 15 years probably. Now you're doing coaching. You're helping people transition from high level military and combat arms and kung fu ninja stuff to models to actresses, directors, you name it. Ed's doing it, and he's taking them into the financial services industry. And please correct me if did I miss anything. Let's go there. Did I miss anything?
No, yeah, that sounds pretty accurate, and it's a great high level sort of explanation of some of the things that I've done.
Fantastic. All right, cool. Now let's get into it, Ed, because you and I talk. We talk relatively often, and normally we trash talk, but we're talking. We're always talking about something. And one thing that I did want to make sure we got after today was how to raise a million from zero in 60 days. Because there's a lot of people who are real estate investors or looking into the multifamily space or just doing single family and want to figure out how to raise money. So, and I wanted let's dive straight into it. What would you do starting that out? What would be the first thing you did?
So, being able to raise $1 million in 60 days is no small feat. A big part of what success you have to reach first is mindset, and in your mind, being able to see and visualize being able to close that $1 million. So the next part of it is also taking a look at what is your current ability? Where do you currently stand? So the way that I explain to people when I coach them is that when you're raising capital, there's two major components, and I compare it to like swimming. So when you're swimming, you can get really far if you can find a good tide and a good current. And all you have to do is just float. And then the current will take you out and you'll travel a very far distance. At the same time, you can travel a very far distance in water if you're swimming and if you're a really good swimmer, right? Now,
Okay.
the ideal is if you have both, right? So if you're a great swimmer and you find the right tide or the right current, that can move you very, very far. So what is that? What's the equivalent of that when it comes to raising capital? There's a whole bunch of people out there right now that are younger, raising capital. They're using a lot of technology. Marketing and digital marketing is like finding a good tide. And you don't have to be a great salesperson. All you have to
Right.
do is if you have the right audience and make the right broadcast and get out there, well, you found a really good tide. And congratulations, you can raise $1 million pretty quick. But for me, I'm an old school person, right? So of course, after being in the industry for so long, I've got to I've learned how to become a really good swimmer, and that's the
Right.
major component of what I teach people when I'm coaching. So I'm not a specialist at finding the tide. I'm more a specialist at going and having the sales ability and being able to close. Now, I'm biased, of course, and I will say that if you do have a good tide, being a good swimmer is always going to help. So
Right.
that's kind of like the first part of it is take a look at what skill set do I have? Am I a really good digital marketing person, or where's my sales ability? What do I feel my sales ability is, and then break it down from there.
Right. Okay. Now we talked about the you mentioned something and I'm gonna be a little bit selfish for those of you who are watching right now. I'm big when it comes to the online marketing part. I'm good on video, it's where I'm comfortable, as well as audio. But one thing when we had talked before, one thing you said, Ali, yes, you're good on those things, but there's one thing you're never going to be able to avoid when it comes to raising capital, and that's getting onto those phones and talking to people and talking to them in person. And when you said it, I knew it, right? But I didn't want to accept it. And now, now that I'm on the other side of it, I'm like, okay, he's absolutely right. Can you tell us what are those conversations? What should those conversations be like? What needs to be said, and how do we really initiate those conversations, particularly when you're like an introvert and you want to get into capital raising, but you're just not super comfortable with talking to people.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of it is this mindset or this quote that I pull from Zig Ziglar, which is you can have everything you want in life if you help just enough other people get what they want in life. So regardless of who you're going to talk to, most people are searching for something in life,
Right.
regardless if it's financial or not. So it really, especially for introverts, it really takes the pressure off when you're on a phone call because now you can say the person I'm talking to wants something in life. So why don't I start asking them about that? What do you hope to get? And they'll start to open up and they'll start telling about, well, these are my challenges. These are the things I'm concerned about, whether it's my kids, what running out of money, they'll say something. And then you can start to show them or start to figure out, okay, where I want to go is become a real estate investor or raise $1 million in capital. What would my ask pair well with the direction that they're heading in life?
Right.
Right. So if they say that I'm worried about running out of money, it's like, well, great. I actually happen to be a real estate investor and I might be able to help you along that road. Let me show you how other people have been able to accomplish or been able to solve that problem using real estate. Well, now it becomes a little easier to have that conversation with them. Does that make
Right.
sense?
That makes perfect sense. That actually makes perfect sense because it's basically just like you said. It's the marketing side of it in me. The marketing in me says knowing your audience's problem, knowing what the issue is, knowing what you need to tell them for them to want to come to you with whatever that problem is. You see wholesalers do it. The best example is I think it was like a Geico commercial, and Geico said Geico had the commercial on, and before you can hit the skip button on YouTube, Geico said you can't skip this ad because it's over, right? And that was it, and that was how they were speaking to everybody's problem. Like immediately, that was the first thing they said. You you can't beat us because it's already done, and that was it. But it's a genius move, and it makes even more sense for those who are introverted, because for introverts, if you can, in my opinion, if you can tell them, hey, you need to know what this guy likes or doesn't like when it comes to buying groceries, and you can get right to it. This way, they spend as little time in this uncomfortable spot as possible, and can get right to the meat of the situation. So that's excellent advice, Ed. That makes a lot of sense. So let's move forward. So we're doing this in 60 days. You already said that 60 days is not an easy thing to do. So outside of mindset, like what's the first physical thing that they need to do? Is it a CRM? Is it just putting down the names of family and calling them and emailing people? What's the very first thing that you would do? Like we said, if you're starting with zero, got no money in your pocket, you're like, hey, I'm going to raise money and I'm going to be amazing at it. What's with your experience of 15 years or so of it doing it? What would you do very first?
All right. So just a quick extra thought before we move on to that question.
Absolutely.
Just to sum up the last part that we were talking about is when you're broadcasting and you're speaking to other people, when it comes to considering your audience, a big element of what you're trying to do is empathize. Really good capital raisers and salespeople have an ability to empathize. And you're basically saying, what is it? Tell me what it's like to be you.
Right.
And that's what you're saying is what are your pain points? What is it like to be you? And where that differentiates yourself from everybody else is that there's so many quote unquote salespeople or even people out in society that just only care about themselves and only talk about themselves.
Right.
And when you change that polarity and say, oh, I'm a person that's just interested in hearing what your life is like and the challenges that you're facing, there's very few people in society that are like that. So when you say that, that already makes you stand out and people start to open up. And that's what you're looking for. So empathy is the key, is one of the key approaches to get into.
So let's stay there for a little bit. We can get to this the million 60 in six, the million in 60 days. We're gonna get to it, but I think this is important because this is something that you don't hear often. We always hear it put in the format of figure out their problems. I've only heard it one time when it comes to the empathy piece. Talk, go a little bit more in detail if you can, Ed, on the process of figuring out how do you develop that empathy, because for those who are super who struggle with empathy like myself, what is it that I need to do to figure out how to clean all that empathy up and to be able to empathize with people and really understand what's going on their side of the stick?
I think the first part is asking good questions and showing that you genuinely care. So, and when it's very small, little subtle differences. And the difference between failure and success is not about these big major differences. It's about these tiny little habits or these tiny little things collected all together, executed over long periods of time. It's just like going to the gym. All right. So success in physical fitness is not about going to the gym once and then bench pressing 300 pounds and then never going to the gym again. It's about pushing yourself a little
Right.
bit outside your comfort zone, a little bit outside your ability, and then doing that consistently, 3 times a week, every day, whatever it is, over long periods of time. So, what is the first part of empathy? The first part of empathy is changing slightly your vocabulary and orienting your vocabulary to your audience, not to you. I'll give you an example. There's a whole bunch of people in the real estate world that are capital raising, and they do these challenges. And you see it quite a lot online. And you'll see people that were saying like, "Oh, I'm doing the 100K in 30-day challenge," or the in this case, we'll do a million in 60-day challenge, and they'll
Right.
make a little hashtag and they'll throw it all over social media. That's more about you. So if I was an audience member and if I was an investor, say, well, you've added a deadline and urgency for your sake, not for my sake. There's no benefit for me. The benefit for you is that you become a hero if you get it. So why should I invest my money and my time for something that looks like somebody's trying to trailblaze faster than they should be? It's okay to set that goal for yourself, but don't make it public because that's not a selling feature for me. I could care less if you're trying to raise 100,000 in 30 days or $1 million in 60 days, right?
Right.
That's your goal. That's not my goal, right? So what you can do is create it and craft it differently where it's in their best interest. So I'll give you an example. How I would pivot that or slightly adjust it is to say that I'm raising capital for a great deal right now. However, it closes in 60 days and I cannot get anybody else in after that. Now that is a deadline that is essentially saying the same thing, but it's oriented to my audience.
Right.
It's a benefit for you, not a benefit for me,
Right.
which is pay attention because after 60 days, I will not be able to get you into this deal.
Right. It's gone. Hmm. Okay. That's well, I'm listen. I'm taking notes, and also for those of you who are watching and listening, if you were in those challenges, don't feel bad. I did it too. It's all for a purpose. It's all for growth. You're gonna get better, whatever it is, and however you do it, you're gonna get better. But definitely, I'm taking some of that ed and I'm running with it. Also, for those of you who are watching again and listening, if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free. At the end, Ed has agreed to grace us with some Q&A. If you got any questions on capital raising, I'm sure Ed can entertain it and he will be able to answer your questions. So just drop them in the chat wherever you're at, and I should be able to see it. Now, going forward, Ed, so let's get back into the 60 days from zero. What you were going to go over the very first step, the first thing you need to do to get that started, because I know you've got a full on a full layout on how to get it done, and you'll get into it. But let's start at step number one. What are we doing?
So the first step, and every year in private equity, we would always have our targets. So come January, we'd sit down and then everybody take a look around the table, all the capital raisers, and then they would assign a number and say, well, this is, they would basically say, Ed, how much do you think you're going to be able to raise by the end of the year? And you'd say a number, and then they would say, great. And then they would add on 40% and say,
Right.
that's what you have to raise by the end of the year. Right. So it would freak you out. And then the next step you would do is you would go in and you start to break it down into bite-sized pieces. So you start breaking it down by quarter, and then every quarter you start breaking it down by monthly, and then every month you break it down to weekly targets, almost getting to the point where you can break it down to how much do you need to raise on every single meeting in order to reach that target by the end of the year. Right? So it's taking a look and basically taking your goal and breaking it down into bite-sized pieces so it doesn't seem as daunting.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So that makes perfect sense. So basically, it's the old adage of how do you eat the elephant, right? And you eat it piece by piece.
Exactly.
And going back to what you said
Right.
earlier, is really the 1%, not 1% rule, improvement on 1% better every day.
Right.
Okay, dope. So now let's go. Now, first of all, how many steps are there into this process? Would you say in your way of doing it? How many steps would you say is there?
Well, here's the first thing that I would do. Let's take a look at the full numbers here. And if you throw up the spreadsheet that I
Gotcha.
created, this is an example of what I would do when I was working with somebody, right? So if somebody says, "Hey, Ed, I want to raise 1 million in 60 days," all right? So this is the kind of numbers that I would start to break down for people. Okay, so let's put down. Okay, there's 60 days there, right? And then there's which is basically 8 weeks. And best practices in financial services is that we've been taught in on Wall Street or in financial services that in order to reach significant targets, and these kind of numbers are seem to be relatively significant, then you really have to look at 10 meetings a week, having 10 new qualified meetings. So brand new people that you don't know, that you haven't met before, that are qualified. So you book 10 and a couple will fall out. So you're ideally aiming for 8 meetings a week, right? So you got 8 weeks, 8 meetings a week. That's 64 meetings. And these are qualified people. That's the type of pipeline that you need to fill in to be able to hit some of these kind of numbers, right? Okay. So that's kind of the time frame. So the next piece is like, okay, great. If we're working on a 64 meetings across 60 days, this is our raise. Our raise is $1 million over here. Now, if we close on every single meeting, then we only really have to close $15,000. Right? So it doesn't seem like such a big number. Now, it's also unrealistic to expect that you're going to close on every single meeting, right? Now you take a look at where's my sales ability, and this is where the swimming comes into. What kind of swimmer am I? And take a look at, for me, I've closed $1 million in one meeting before, right? Mm-hmm. So I know that I'm at that kind of caliber. So it's possible for me that in order to raise $1 million, I can do it in one meeting if I have the right client. I can do it, but that's probably a whale, and it's not. Those are few and far between. It's more realistic. If I was trying to break down for myself, I know I have the capacity to close $1 million, but realistically, I'll probably aim for 350 to 250, which means I really have to have 4 closing meetings in the course of 60 days, which is kind of realistic. But you don't get to a $250,000 person or being able to close that from day one. Big part of it is asking yourself, how much money can I get somebody to write for me, or how much confidence? How do I talk? How do I carry myself? How much experience do I have? Right. And how much money do I think I can get in one meeting? And if you're a $50,000 person, it's like, well, I'm pretty sure I can close $50,000. If you're a $50,000 person, then you got to run your stats. That means that I have to have 20 closing meetings in order to get to $1 million. You got to break it all down.
So basically, then what you're doing is you're backwards planning, going from whatever number that you can raise to whatever number you're going to end up getting. Like you said, with the 50K, and we'll go back to the example so you guys can see as I'm talking. So on this, for the 50K, you have to do 20 meetings to get that 50K to hit 1 million. But at the same token, right, you can hit 10, but you got to close 100,000 on each one of those 10. But so when you're sitting down doing those meetings, though, what's the average? Right. Like, because I know in some real estate events, they'll say, hey, for every 100 people you talk to or 100 deals you go through, you'll get 3 that accept, and you'll actually close 1. With doing the capital raising, I imagine it's something similar. What's the normal averages when it comes to how many people you meet versus how many people you actually close once you get them to the meeting?
Right. So beginning in private equity, rookie capital raisers are given a target. You're not allowed to take a minimum of 25,000 or less. Right. So 25,000 is usually the starting point as the bare minimum. Some will set 50,000 as the minimum, and the reason why is 25,000 is not worth the effort. It's not worth the effort of client relationship, opening accounts, due diligence, all those types of meetings. Right. So 50 is probably more of a realistic number. So if you can't raise between 25 and 50,000, you should really be stopping and spending some more time on improving your skills, right? You got to become a better swimmer. So that's kind of like the default starting place. Now, I would say the average person would probably be around 50. If this is the first raise you're ever doing, it's probably around 50 to 100,000. Now, and you'll be able to figure it out. So as you start having some meetings and you start asking for 100,000, and the person looks at you or the investor looks at you and say, you know what, I'm more comfortable with maybe 50,000. Then you realize, you know what, I'm a $50,000 person. I've asked for 100, and the couple is really only comfortable at 50,000, right? And then just keep trying, keep pushing, and eventually, the more you close, the more you'll realize it's really difficult for me to convince somebody to give me more than $50,000. Then you realize, okay, if that's the case, I'm a $50,000 person. How many
Mhm.
meetings do I need to have on the next 64 days? Well, that's you have to have 20 closing meetings in order to get that.
Right. But does it change? I know in multifamily side, it always seems like there's a certain thing that's kind of the multifamily standard, if you will. And normally it's once one's done, everything starts rolling in. And the same thing harkens back when it in my mind when you talk about the capital raising part. Because after you close somebody, let's say at 50K, you get the investment done. The investment comes back 3-4 years later, whatever the closeout time is to close that deal. And then now they've got, let's say it doubles up, 100K in their pocket. They're going to be more inclined to invest with you with 100K now because you close out that 50K. Is that true, or is that just my thought process?
Yeah. Sorry, you just cut out there for a second.
Oh,
Um,
okay. So
what
yeah.
you're what you're talking about is rollover, and you're absolutely right. Most investors, they're testing you out. Your first raise is going to be on the smaller side, but then as your investment matures and you kick back
Mhm.
out your investment, a lot of times investors, provided that you get great service, you got great investor relations, a lot of times something like 70 to 90% of that would be rolled over and then advanced, and then sometimes even added to, and then you start to build your book that way.
Okay. Okay. So rollover is what it's called. So I just learned something new. That's fantastic. Okay, cool. So we do have we got a couple questions that are popping in, but for now, T, well, we're definitely gonna get to your question. Don't sweat it. We still got a little bit of time left, so I'm gonna hit Ed with the next piece and let him get into the next part of this process, so we can make sure I give you guys as much value as possible. Now, I know Ed's not gonna be able to hit everything because we've got a small amount of time. So Ed, just give I guess a short brief over on the next couple steps when it comes to it. Then you guys from there, you can reach out to him and he can definitely help you out. So go for it, Ed.
Right. The next 2 points that I will go into is, if you're raising $1 million in 60 days, you gotta understand that for you, in order to do that, it's to excel over everybody else, which means
Hmm.
that, are you willing to do things as a capital raiser or go further than other people out there that they either will not or cannot do? I'll give you a quick example. One of the first times I raised, I took $1 million check.
Hmm.
This just blew my mind how this happened. I caught $1 million check on a first meeting, and it's like it never happened before. And the reason why I got $1 million on a first meeting with somebody
Hmm.
is because I was willing to drive 3 hours north. They're like lived well out of the city,
Hmm.
and they're very high net worth. And they told me they had so many investment advisors from downtown Toronto that were calling them, and they would always end off with, "Well, if you come into our office, we'll be able to go through and come up with a portfolio plan for you." I was the only person that drove 3 hours up to. It was essentially a cottage, but that's where they lived. And they lived in a very remote area, and I drove 3 hours to go see them. And and I didn't realize I was going to close. By the time I closed, they stopped and they said, "You got this account the second you showed up, because you're the only
Wow.
licensed stockbroker advisor that took the time to come out here." And
Wow.
my wife and I, we agreed that whoever comes up here gets this account. And I was willing to do something that other advisors could not or would not do. So go the extra mile and make it easy for other people to give you money or to entrust their money to you, which is a form of empathy and white glove service.
Right.
What can I do to make my clients comfortable?
Hmm. Okay. Now, if sorry, T. Well, I know you got a question. I've got one more. So, Ed, if you didn't have that situation, and this is back to the empathy piece, if you were from the outside looking in and you don't know the guy from the Man on the Moon, you're doing your research, looking him up, he or she up, and you want to know where you can take that extra mile, how do you find that? With all the assets we have, YouTube, Facebook, IG, all these great assets you have to find it, how do you do that research? What do you do? What are you looking for, and where are you looking to find out what they need?
This is where empathy comes in. All right. So going back, and we're starting to build those building blocks. The first piece is empathy, is what does your prospect care about? The next piece is, the best way to explain it in one sort of statement would be, all things being equal, the
Mm-hmm.
likable person wins. All things being unequal, the likable person still wins. So become the likable person to
Right.
that person. So if you can empathize and figure out what are they, where's their pain points, where are their values, and can I support or can I speak to those values, you start becoming a very likable person and go that extra mile. Because other people are more interested in, I want to raise $1 million. Like I'm doing the $1 million in 60-day challenge. I only care about me. And it already, that sounds like I'm only focused in on myself.
Mm,
And if you're not
mm,
interested in writing me $100,000 check, then I'm going to move on. Well, an
right.
investor will balk at that and then move away. If you start to take a look at it, it's like, well, tell me a little bit about yourselves. What's your pain point? It's like, well, we want to invest your money, but nobody's willing to come up here and talk to us. It's like, oh, I'll come up and talk to you. You
Right.
will. I become a very likable person.
Mm, that makes perfect sense. Holy moly, that makes perfect sense. That's an amazing quote, by the way. The that the likable person still wins. I love it. All right, so hey, we're gonna get into a quick Q&A. We've got one question for you that I didn't hit already, and this one comes from Tiwa Kufu Oladipo, and Tiwa asks, "How does a person identify as someone that could be skilled in capital raising, or in raising capital? That is."
Okay, how does a person identify as someone that could be skilled in capital raising? So one of the first things I'll do is that I'll encourage people to take what's called an MBTI test, which is
Mm-hmm.
a Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and you can just Google it and you can find it online. Just type in MBTI free test, and it'll take you to 16personalities.com or something like that. Take the free test, and then it will spit out one of 16 different personality types. The first letter is either going to be an E or an I. Now, if you're an E, you're an extrovert. If you're an I, you're an introvert. Now, if you're an introvert, it doesn't mean that you won't be successful in capital raising. It just means that meeting new people and being in a social environment will drain you. And
Mm,
it's not necessarily going to be you're not going to have the advantage in the room.
right.
Extroverts have the advantage in the room. So I'm a raving extrovert. So for me, when I go into a room full of people, it actually energizes me. And that is one of the things where I have an advantage over the over 50% or whatever the percentage of society is. So that would favor me as a capital raiser. Once again,
Wow.
if you really want to be a capital raiser and you're an introvert, I know some introverts that are really good at capital raising. It's just the difference is that they have to take time away and recharge almost daily. So it's to a disadvantage to them versus somebody like me. I have the advantage. So if you're an extrovert, then that would start to favor you.
Huh. Okay. That's an amazing way of looking at it. I didn't think about that. That is actually I think absolutely true. I've seen quite a few people who are extroverts be very good at capital or sorry, introverts that are very good at capital raising, but afterwards I won't see them for like 3 or 4 days at minimum. Where the extroverts, I'll see them the next day right back online yelling and screaming into the camera and what have you. Okay, so we got another question, and this one comes from Rayleigh, and this question is, how do you have? Oh, sorry. How do you have a lesson learned where you didn't close? Or sorry, do you have a lesson learned where you didn't close and what went wrong? Great question, really.
Yeah. One of my biggest things that I went into it, and I was trained from the beginning, is to always expect the close. And I did. And I did that for many years. What ended up happening is that one of my clients passed away, and he was in his 40s, and it was a big shock. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't expecting it. Next thing you know, I'm in front of his children, and his children are in their 20s. So here I am, is like, of course they're going to sign it over to me because I've been managing this portfolio for the last 5 years. I did it with their dad, and I didn't realize I was called to a meeting to basically get fired. And they told me that, hey, Ed, my friend over here that I went to high school with, he's about
Mm-hmm.
to get his license. So he's not licensed right now, but he will be next week. And we want to fire you and move this $1 million account to my friend. And I was sitting there beside myself. It's like, he's not even licensed right now. I'm licensed and I've been managing this portfolio and you're going to be firing me. I was like, I don't get it. It's like, I'm pretty much, I was expecting, well, this is how the portfolio is going to be managed. And I was more telling them, and I went too far where I expected too much. And I expected, well, of course you're going to have me manage it. Let me tell you how things are going to go. And I'm like,
Right.
no, how things are going to go is we're going to fire you. Right. And I didn't give them the proper respect. I didn't read the room properly. And I recognized, you know what? I have zero capability to manage money with a millennial. My specialty throughout most of my career was
Mm-hmm.
baby boomers. And I knew baby boomers inside out, and I really resonated with them. But at that point, I realized I have no ability to resonate with millennials. I don't even understand them, and I didn't care to learn. And because I didn't care to learn, I couldn't connect with them, and that's how I got fired. I spent the next time, you know what, I need to change, and I started focusing on what do millennials care about. And once again, I had to retool myself and empathize with the entire cohort. What are their values? What are their hopes and dreams? Instead of telling them what my hopes and dreams are and this is how they should live. And because of that, I lost that account. And that's why I didn't close.
Wow. So you went all that way to get fired, to discover you don't talk to millennials well. Then you went back into the bat lab and you sat down and dug in on figuring out how to talk to millennials. All right, I gotta ask. So how did you do that? What was that? What did that look like? Did you sit down and read like Teen Magazine? What I mean, what maybe Teen Magazine was a bad example, but you know what I mean. What was what was the
Yes.
process? What did that look like?
So one of the first things I did was I hired a whole bunch of millennials. And I just sat and watched them, and I asked them how they thought. And
Mm-hmm.
so part of it was is that some of the millennials I hired, they wanted to get into finance and they wanted to learn about finance. And for me, I wanted to learn how they thought. So I hired them, and it was a give and take. I trained them about financial services, and I wanted to learn from them, how do they think, what are their values, what do they care about. And I hired a whole bunch of folks that were, very active on Instagram. And I didn't know the first thing about Instagram, so I started posting some stuff, and they look at me, it's like, take that down. It's like you're posting like a dad. It's like you look terrible. And then they started telling me, and they started telling me how to dress. I was like, you realize you come across, you come over like that. You got to change your clothes. You got to change this. You got to wear this, and you got to wear this.
Right.
And they started dictating my life. And of course, I was listening to it, and I started to really pick up from their input on how they think I should be presenting myself. And I eventually became a specialist on raising capital from millennials.
Wow. So basically, they told you put some Jordans on, wear some tighter pants, and and put some holes in your shirt, and call it Yeezys, and you'll be good to go. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. That's a great adjustment. All right. So I know you got a lot of things going on in life. And ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are listening and watching, thank you so much for asking your questions. Rayleigh, Tiwa, thank you for chiming in. For everybody who's watching and listening, thank you again, again, again. Thank you so much. So we got one more question for you, Ed. And this is the tougher question, but we always close out with this question. What question do you wish you were asked more often? And what's the answer to that question?
I think one of the big questions that I like being asked is how can I improve, right? And with the mindset of being open in because when somebody says how can I improve,
Mm-hmm.
it's well, we talk about having an internal locus of control, which is part of the 12-step program. And part of the 12-step program is I have to admit that I don't know. And
Right.
that's the first step to really start opening up and having change. But if somebody says is that, hey, I wasn't able to close is because of that person and this person, that's an external locus of control. That's who I was when I wasn't able to close those millennials, which is basically, I told them is like, well, they were dumb. They didn't see my value. That was an
Mm.
external locus of control. When I said that to my mentor came back and was like, no, it's your fault. You didn't resonate with them. That's an internal locus of control. So
Wow.
part of it is that the first step to improvement is asking the world, how can I get better? Because I recognize I can be better. It's the first step of every 12-step program. And there's a reason why those 12-step programs work and really start to affect change. So if you're not in addiction, you can still do the same thing in business. And the first step is recognizing that I need to improve or I need to change and I need to get the insight from somewhere else.
Sheesh. So those of you who are still here listening, if y'all aren't getting something from Ed, something is seriously wrong. I want you to go back after I post this thing. Go back onto the YouTube, subscribe on YouTube, whatever you got to do. Figure it out and watch this over again because Ed is throwing some money at you right now, and you're not. You got to catch it. I just want to make sure you're catching it. All right, Ed. So I know like I said, we're gonna close out. I'm really excited, so I want to ask more questions, but we'll bring you back on later on because I know you got things to do. How do people get a hold of you, and where can they get in contact with you and reach out to you?
The best way to reach out to me is on LinkedIn, and I'll say that for a couple of reasons. Part of it is that on LinkedIn, if you connect with me, just use my name, Edmund Chien, you'll find me there, and just throw me a connection link. But the reason why I use that is because I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and I'll give in other bite-sized pieces on a weekly basis, or other nuggets of knowledge to really help people succeed. And that's really my motivation, is to help people improve and get better. And whether you're just going to be following me on the sidelines and just watching some of my posts, or getting a little bit further and retaining me or hiring me to coach you directly. But LinkedIn's probably the best way.
Fantastic. Good stuff, Ed. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm the Oliver Perry. This is my buddy Ed. Oh, wrong side. Ed Chien. And make sure you guys reach out to him if you need help with capital raising, that kind of thing. If you want to find out more about the podcast or want to tune in again, please make sure you like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. You can also follow on the Facebook at the same name, The Oliver Perry, or you can find me on IG at The Oliver Perry, as well as on LinkedIn at just Oliver Perry. So until then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again so much for tuning in. We will see you again next time. Make sure you always remember, you're better than you were, but you're not half as good as you're going to be. We'll see you next time.